In July 1943, the vast fields of the Kursk salient in southwestern Russia simmered with tension. Over 1,000 miles of wheat and sunflowers stretched under a summer sun that was indifferent to the thousands of men and machines waiting in the shadows. From the north and south, German Panzer divisions began their march into what would become the largest tank battle in history. At the heart of this storm were the Tiger tanks, symbols of technical genius and terror. Each one a steel fortress on tracks, armed with an 88mm gun that could annihilate any Soviet tank at long range. For the crews who climbed into their armored behemoths, this was both a privilege and a sentence. They were elite, yes, but elite in a world bristling with mines, artillery, and a disciplined enemy that had been preparing for this moment for months. By mid-1943, Hitler's military strategy relied on the notion that technical superiority could compensate for dwindling manpower. Operation Citadel was audacious, a double-pronged strike aimed at pinching off the Kursk salient and annihilating the Soviet forces within. The Germans massed what they had left in armor, including the feared Panzer 6 Tiger I, some Panthers, and a supporting cast of Panzer III and IV models. Tigers were deployed at the tips of Panzerkeil formations, wedges designed to punch through Soviet lines while deflecting incoming fire with the sheer thickness of their frontal armor. Their guns could destroy T-34s at ranges far beyond what Soviet crews could respond to. In theory, the plan was precise and devastating. Tigers would lead, other tanks would follow, infantry would secure the flanks, and the Soviet defenses would collapse under firepower and fear. The reality, however, was far more complicated. The Soviets had been anticipating Citadel for months. Intelligence, reconnaissance, and sheer patience allowed them to turn the salient into a fortress. Extensive minefields stretched for miles. Anti-tank guns were emplaced in layers, camouflaged with meticulous care. Every river, ditch, and depression became a potential kill zone. The Soviets understood that they could not match German armor in a direct duel, but they could exploit the terrain, concentrate fire, and force even the mighty Tigers into situations where their armor and firepower would count for less. By July, the Red Army had amassed a staggering number of T-34s, Su-152 assault guns, and 85mm anti-aircraft weapons adapted for anti-tank use. They were outnumbered individually, but not collectively. When the German assault began on July 5th, Tigers led the advance, rolling into the fields with their commanders peering through periscopes, confident that the superior gun and armor would carry them forward. Early engagements validated their reputation. T-34s and lighter German tanks fell under the long-range fire of the Tiger's 88mm cannon. Crews developed a rhythm, coordinating their moves, scanning the horizon for Soviet armor, and marking targets. But even in these initial clashes, the cracks began to show. Minefields slowed the columns, forcing Tigers into choke points where a concentrated battery of 85mm guns could target the underbelly or sides of the tank. The Germans had counted on speed and momentum, but momentum was disrupted by hidden defenses and the deliberate depth of Soviet planning. The Soviets had also refined the use of combined arms. Infantry-supported anti-tank crews and artillery units were positioned to create overlapping zones of fire. Smokescreens obscured approaches and forced German crews to rely on visual spotting through narrow slits. Every field, every road, was part of a larger trap designed to blunt the technological edge of the Tigers. Where earlier battles might have seen the Germans steamroll defenses, here, the heavy tanks were brought to a crawl. Crews that had been confident in prior engagements now faced the reality that their machines were not invincible. By the third day of battle, the Tigers had suffered more losses than expected. Mechanical failures compounded the tactical challenges. These machines, heavy and complex, required constant maintenance, yet crews were forced to operate continuously under fire. Engines overheated, tracks were damaged by mines, and ammunition resupply could not keep pace with the consumption during sustained fire. Even when a Tiger survived a direct hit, it was often immobilized by damage to its tracks or suspension. In some instances, the tank was effectively a stationary target, and the Red Army's gunners, already experienced in hunting Tigers, focused their fire with precision. The Soviet T-34s were central to countering the Tigers. They were not as heavily armed, and their armor could not withstand a direct 88mm shot, but their mobility, numbers, and coordination allowed them to close in on Tigers from flanks or rear, striking weak points that the Tiger's frontal armor could not protect. Multiple T-34s would coordinate attacks, forcing a Tiger to split its attention between targets, increasing the probability of critical hits. The psychological effect on crews was significant. Every maneuver required careful judgment, yet even perfect positioning could result in catastrophic damage from overlapping fire. Infantry also played a decisive role. Red Army soldiers deployed anti-tank rifles, magnetic mines, and satchel charges. In some of the most desperate confrontations, infantrymen engaged Tiger tanks at close range, sometimes resorting to ramming tactics when other options failed. Such acts were extraordinarily risky, but in the context of Kursk, necessary. Tiger crews could not assume dominance merely by presence. Every approach had to be calculated against a network of lethal threats prepared to exploit even minor errors. The human dimension of operating a Tiger under these conditions cannot be overstated. Crews faced relentless stress, aware that every misjudgment could lead to instant death or capture. Visibility was limited, heat inside the tank was intense, and communication among crew members required precision under conditions that were anything but precise. The longer the battle dragged on, the more fatigue set in, and the less effective the crews became. Even elite soldiers were vulnerable to the cumulative pressure of mines, artillery, anti-tank fire, and the ever-present threat of flanking Soviet armor. Mechanical vulnerability became painfully evident as the battle progressed. Tigers required constant servicing, but frontline conditions and distance from maintenance facilities meant that many damaged tanks were abandoned or destroyed to prevent capture. The heavy armor that inspired fear when moving freely became a liability when immobilized, making the tanks into fixed targets for artillery and coordinated tank attacks. The German logistics system, already strained, could not replace destroyed or disabled Tigers quickly enough to sustain the offensive. Prokhorovka on July 12th became a focal point of the battle and highlighted the limits of Tiger dominance. Thousands of tanks engaged in brutal, close-quarters fighting, often at ranges where the Tiger's 88mm gun could not be used effectively without risking friendly fire or missing entirely in chaotic conditions. Soviet tankers pressed forward with ferocity, using numbers and maneuver to blunt Tiger advances, while the Germans inflicted severe damage they could not achieve a decisive breakthrough. Tigers, for all their technical prowess, were vulnerable when confronted with dense, determined opposition in a landscape filled with prepared defenses. Attrition among Tiger crews was severe. For every tank destroyed, the loss of trained personnel further eroded German effectiveness. Replacement crews lacked experience and familiarity with the complexities of the Tiger systems, compounding operational risks. The myth of the invincible Tiger began to crumble under the sustained pressure of well-coordinated Soviet defenses. The combination of mechanical fragility, concentrated anti-tank fire, and sheer numerical opposition meant that the Tiger, though formidable, was not unstoppable. The aftermath of Kursk revealed the limits of German armored doctrine in the face of comprehensive defense. Operation Citadel failed to achieve its objectives. Tigers had advanced only to be halted and, in many cases, destroyed. The Red Army, having absorbed and learned from the initial assaults, transitioned swiftly to a counteroffensive, capitalizing on German overextension. The battle demonstrated that careful planning, preparation, and exploitation of terrain could neutralize even the most fearsome weaponry. The psychological effect on both sides was profound. Tiger crews had entered battle with a mixture of confidence and expectation of dominance. By the end, the harsh realities of modern warfare, mechanical failures, well-prepared defenses, and the relentless opposition of both tanks and infantry had imposed a level of attrition and stress that even elite crews could not withstand indefinitely. For the Soviets, the successful defense and eventual counteroffensive solidified lessons that would carry them across Eastern Europe in the following years. Kursk became more than a tactical engagement. It was a test of industrial capacity, strategic planning, and human endurance. The Tiger, while technologically advanced and intimidating, was ultimately a tool whose effectiveness depended on circumstances beyond mere firepower. Soviet soldiers and commanders understood that to defeat a technological edge, they needed coordination, patience, and the willingness to exploit every vulnerability. The battle illustrated that no weapon, no matter how fearsome, could overcome disciplined, prepared, and strategically savvy opposition. The human cost of Kursk was immense. Thousands of tanks and armored vehicles were destroyed. Casualties were high on both sides. Yet the Red Army's ability to replace losses, combined with careful planning and tactical ingenuity, allowed them to absorb the initial German assault and emerge prepared for the counteroffensive. For Tiger crews, every advance was a gamble with survival. Their skill and courage often insufficient against the combination of Soviet preparation and sheer force of numbers. In the end, the story of Tiger crews at Kursk is one of human skill tested against adversity, of technology confronted by preparation and strategy, and of the unrelenting cost of war. The Germans had brought their finest armor and crews, yet they faced a foe that had anticipated their every move, shaped the battlefield in their favor, and applied overwhelming pressure with relentless discipline. Tigers rolled into Kursk expecting to dominate, but they encountered a crucible that tested every assumption about armored supremacy. They survived, they fired, but they were not invincible. And in that, the Soviets found their victory, and the world learned that no machine, no matter how advanced, could replace preparation, coordination, and the human will to fight.